Hello, art, comic book, and animation friends. So, the randomness of my brain, jumping around as it ever does, has landed me on doing a video this Wednesday afternoon about my work on Batman Beyond. There's a lot of people who are fans of Batman Beyond, and I am too. It was a really fun show to work on. So, for those not familiar, I worked on the show as a background designer, freelancing from here in Toronto, and I would deliver them designs every week. And as a quick overview, I made this book years ago on lulu.com, and I believe it's defunct, although ridiculously, I haven't even checked the link, but at the last I remember, it's not available, but it may be something I re-release. We'll see. But what this was a self-printed book years ago that I put together of my designs, and it's going to serve as an overview. Kind of zoom in a bit here. And I called it Beyond Design. And I just collected basically and self-printed my line art and tonal art, various stages, which I'm going to demonstrate later. I've got some original art over here that I'm going to show you. I collected together as many examples as I could fit into a book of the work I did for the show. And as I said, I had a weekly contract to be a freelancer out of my house, and let's move Scully out of the way here. Batman's going to keep guarding us because he's the closest thing to Batman Beyond. He's not yet beyond, he's just Batman. He hasn't gone beyond. See if I can avoid the glare here. So there are all kinds of settings, and some of them were rougher than others, which were apparent in the book. I had the job sometimes to do rough designs before the storyboard art was done. So I would just be given a script to work from. And something like this was probably an example like that, where I was visualizing, I've put rough up here. This is like interior Cuvier's gene splicing lab. And it would just be a rough description from the writer of the setting. And I'd have to come up with something that would be given to a storyboard artist to start working from. Something interesting, and I would usually do one shot, sometimes two, but usually just one. And they could take it and run with it when they did it from before the storyboard. Sometimes you would do things afterwards. If there was no time, then sometimes the storyboard artist would just wing it and do a rough design that they put in the board. And then I would be given the storyboard and asked to elaborate from that. And actually I have a big bin of storyboards and things. You know how it is. There's too many videos to make when you're a YouTube so-called content creator. But I've got a whole bin of all kinds of storyboards, many of which have been unseen from people like Bruce Timm and Glenn Murakami and who are some of the other ones, Bronny Del Carmen. I've got to show you guys. You'd really be interested. But again, one step at a time. So sometimes you would get a storyboard from people that were assigned a script, and then I would, from the storyboard, be given certain panels that I would then have to follow, like they do a panning shot. And I would have to kind of do what's called plussing that, which is just build on it. And I don't know which of these are which. I didn't note down. I can sort of guess in some of them. This is like a rough sketch, a pencil sketch that I would have shown them. And there's also a finished version of this somewhere. I don't know if I included in this book. There were really a lot, so I had to kind of pick and choose. This would be like a line sketch with notes that I did for the, let's zoom in a bit more. It's an example of the kind of rougher stuff. Exterior field night. And I was trying to establish different pieces that they needed. And you know what it was is like any working production situation, you ended up doing a lot of different types of work. Sometimes you had time to make it a lot cleaner and fancy it up. Other times it was a seat of the pants. They'd give you a whole bunch to do in a week. And you're just scrambling to keep up. So this is like so you do the best you can. This is like a park, an overhead park. Some of these will show up better than others. I'll kind of zoom through this a little bit more. This is like an upshot on a This would probably have been a shot from a board, although I'm calling it rough. But yeah, it might have been actually, see, it's hard to remember. It was quite a while ago. It was in the 90s, early 2000s maybe. I don't even remember that. How's that for memory? Sometimes you'd be given a sequence of things to visualize from the script, so I did these rough renderings. And the idea was to establish the mood, the perspective, the basic design. Again, subject to change by the storyboard artist, because sometimes they would be staging a scene. You would design, say, a room, and you wouldn't make the room quite big enough for them to have an extended fight. Or maybe there would be elements that they would be interacting with while Batman Beyond is fighting with a villain. So they would need to adjust and compensate. So it's sort of the give and take of production is what you'd encounter. This says Gotham's exterior Gotham Suites, rough idea number 1. And this is some kind of super tower. And it was like done in that, what somebody called quite rightly, the dark deco style. It's like Art Deco, but the film noir combined with Art Deco, combined with science fiction, which was the look for the backgrounds that we worked up for Batman Beyond. This is another example of that same setting. Yeah, here was another one. So I think in this sequence in the book, I was simply trying to show the different variations I gave them. I was thinking like of an even overhead super building above this building. Kind of like the Blade Runner, Sid Mead sort of world. These are like a hover train. I'll zoom in so you can see that. This is a scene for a futuristic train script page, whatever. 22. My glasses aren't that good. Old age folks, you know. And I showed the scale because this is like a super train, floating maglev train of some kind. Lots of fun stuff to draw. I mean, this is really great, like working on a show like this, because you have to try and give it a sense of structure and believability, but the sky's the limit. Kind of Jack Kirby land, right? Where you just wildly invent stuff. And this is a setting for a show called Dead Man's Hand. It was the exterior juice bar. So showing the setup, the logo, kind of an general environment of the city. Always thinking of levels, like there's some kind of walkway here. What was this for? Museum. There's an upshot on a pedestal with a kind of skylight, a crystalline sort of skylight. And I did a little structure sketch. I did my video on structure the other day. So here, oops, that's not good. We've thrown the camera off. But in the wild, we keep going. We compromise, overcome, improvise. Yeah, so what I did is, let's try that again. For the sake of the storyboard artist, I did a little structure sketch showing how the setup was, because you couldn't always infer that from one drawing over here, the main shot. So it's all about communication. You're trying to make sure that people down the line understand what you're going for. And there are all kinds of these drawings. These are rougher, Bloodhaven Energy Facility. And all kinds of them. Like, what's this? This is a taxidermy studio. I don't know how clearly that's going to show in the video. I'll keep moving because I want to get to showing original art, which I'll show how it was done in 3 stages. So they're very cool designs, you know, challenging designs is really what the thought I was going to communicate, is that sometimes you would get things that where you're like, how do I make this a little bit different than the other designs? How do I make something that will translate into a final painting done by the overseas production studio? And not repeat yourself, and keep it in keeping with the world and with your previous design styles. This is an interior. Peak's penthouse at night. It's this rich guy. I forget the story now, but so there are lots of pages in this book. I'll just do a flip through here. Kirby Tech, more crazy Kirby Tech. Terrific Trio control room. Had fun with those. And a lot of it was done in what I call pseudo Kirby, at least the control room machinery type stuff, because like back here, like using sort of kind of riffing off Kirby tropes, you know, the way he would do zigzaggy things and repeat units. It's like implying functionality in machinery, but not being too worried about specific function, like you might be in a more realistic type thing. Some of these drawings, like this is a hallway in one of these Art Deco rooms, they're much more, you know, Art Deco style room. They're much more straightforward and more stylish. I was always trying to go for the lighting and mood. And that usually got watered down and simplified when you look at the final shows, but it was fun. I mean, you would know that it would get simplified by the production process. I tried to make them as cool as I could. And this will show here what I'm about to show, some of the originals. I would always routinely, for the rendered ones, which were the majority, I would do a line art drawing. I'll zoom in even more if I can. A clean line drawing, which I then Xeroxed. And then on the Xerox, I added blacks. And I did it in that way because this is pre-digital. So in the case of worrying about whether I'd mess up the blacks, I just got into this habit of doing a line drawing. Sometimes it would be in pencil, sometimes in black marker, a thin line marker, like, you know, a Prisma marker, whatever those micron, these guys, stuff like this, micron type. And then I'd Xerox it onto a piece of bond paper, just ordinary, good quality, premium copy paper, add in the blacks with markers, and then I'd copy that again, and I'd end up with the third stage. On a piece of paper, I'd have this, but on a piece of paper, and then I'd add markers. So it was a pre-digital way of allowing myself to have an undo, which occasionally I'd mess something up and go, you know, I just don't like the way the tones were working out, and I could just scrap it, take a new Xerox, and then start working with gray markers. I used gray markers and black Prismacolor pencils. And yeah, it worked pretty well. And the contract was that they kept all the originals. So unfortunately, for years, all these originals, but again, being pre-digital, I would do all this work and give them all 3 stages, box them up every Friday by FedEx, send them off, and repeat it next week, you know, and they paid me a decent salary. I had a young family, it was good income. Unfortunately, I didn't get to keep all of those originals, which are somewhere or another off in the wilds of the recesses of the Warner Brothers vault somewhere. And this is some kind of digital library before and after. And again, there would have been a midpoint where I had the blacks inked in. But it was production, you know, you're working along really fast. It was the way it was done back then, so I would ship everything off. And like I said, I wish I had more of them now. I did sell a bunch that I had kept, and now I only have a very few, which I'm going to show you. This one, for example, was in the early days of digital. So I had Photoshop, and I don't know if I delivered it digitally, but I remember putting this basic tones in digitally, which gave it a more mechanical look, which I don't like as much as the marker and Prismacolor, but that's the way it was. And I'm free now, which I'm doing, to go back to working on originals, and I'm really enjoying it. But I really loved working with the markers and Prismacolor. This was a script called Centuries of the Last Cosmos. And there were a bunch of other artists working on the backgrounds and all aspects of the show. I never really got to see much of their work because, you know, you're just in your bubble, your hive, working away, cranking out all this stuff. In the Crankatorium, as I used to call it. Still do, except now it's Cozy Art Corner. So what I'm going to do now is put this away. I'll show you quickly some of the original art, just a little bit of it to wrap up. And if all the stars line up, I'm aiming to do live streaming soon, and I'll be showing some of this stuff more and talking about it, take questions. But here's an example I found of the few that I do have left with me. This one was done for this, what it was it, Plastic Factory night. And here, for whatever reason, actually must have been in a hurry. So I did I don't know if it really is going to show well on the video. Yeah, I think it shows a bit. I did a blue pencil drawing for the basic perspective. And then instead of inking it with marker, I just, I inked it with, so-called inked it with pencil, you know, I just went over it carefully. And again, I emphasize, like, it was production. It was like you get into this rhythm, you just do it. You don't even get too fussy. Like I look at this now, I put lettering on it. So I guess I didn't care. Still regarding it kind of as a rough in a way. The idea was to get a rendering or drawing good enough to deliver that accomplished the goal, which was to show people down the line the conception that they could work with it and take it in the next step. So there was probably an intermediate drawing, which I don't know where that is, but as I said, I would have photocopied this onto more paper to make the lines black, which is how I ended up here. This is again a photocopy of the stage with the black. I took another photocopy and then I marker toned it. Let's go over into the zone. And I would have hit it with usually trying to keep a simple light source because you don't want to get super fancy. Because I knew that, first of all, that's less graphic. So the more fancy double, triple lighting you do, you're going to get away from that graphic film noir style. And then you're not going to have that all reproduced over again, usually by the overseas studio, because they even simplified them from what I had done. So I knew I couldn't get super fancy, but I did try and make them nice and put in some transitions like a gradation. So usually what I do is establish the big values and blocks of black, the blocks of tone, decide on a light source, like that this was all in shadow, for example, here, the light's coming from over here. You'd have to make decisions like here, there's a drop off in the lighting on the ground, so that gave me a strip of dark here. And then I'm generally doing an upshot on the lighting so that, see how it gets darker up towards the top. But for interest, you're going to be leaving highlights and things. So you get a highlight on this giant bin, which it implies is some kind of giant tank of something up on top, which looked weird instead of putting them down by the sides. The whole idea was to come up with cool looking and somewhat different designs. Excuse me, like here, something like a plastics factory, you go to yourself, well, what would that look like in the world of Batman Beyond? I have no idea. Like you think of piping, chemicals, but the rest of it was, you could almost do anything, right? The script dictated things like there was a gate that probably was in the action. And those are things you'd have to absolutely hit, because if the script needed a gate, well, you got to show the gate. So and try and include it in one drawing so that the storyboard artist could go from there. And if it was night, well, you got to do it as night. So yeah, there's the indication of the day or night here. I signed this later because I had sold off a whole bunch of these on eBay, which they're out there in the wild somewhere. That's why there's red. I wouldn't normally do that when I was delivering these designs. I signed it later. But I would mark up typically as they asked me to do. We had a format like the show and then the episode, subject, day or night, and then the show's numbering. So that was one design. Let's just zoom in a bit on this. Batman's blocking me. And put in some lighting around the lights here, an indication of skyscrapers. So these are things that hopefully would give the layout artists down the line too, if they're looking at this, enough bits and pieces of the style to work with. Like you could extract from the stylization of these enough information to do more angles and things, because I wouldn't have had time to do all the different angles. Let's show you another one now. I'll zoom back out. For this one, I've got a 3-step example, which is kind of cool, and it survived. And it will really show the, let's do this right. Center ourselves. My camera's still a bit wonky, is it? No, more or less square from my rude smashing of it earlier. So this one was in the same show, Plague, a security booth. I guess there was a shot or a small sequence of guards, As I said, I don't remember the show. I barely read the scripts, which I did, but that was years ago. But I imagine that looking at this, the script must have dictated key components like a doorway, a guard station, some kind of window. I don't know if that would be necessary. So what you had to do as a designer is, as I said already, keep in the style of the show, get the key elements that the script would require for the storyboard artist to be able to stage them. And usually you'd try and draw, if you could do it in one drawing, you'd try and choose an angle that would explain everything to the people down the line, but hopefully in an ideal case would be usable as an actual shot too in the show, which didn't always happen because sometimes I had to show so many things in one scene that it wasn't necessarily a shot that would survive into the show. So that's my recollection of that. But in this one I also did pencil. I had inked the outside, but I just oops, again bashing stuff. But if you see here, trying to get my camera to focus, there we go. I did a very rough blue pencil sketch. It's fairly informal. This one must have been quite a bit faster, you know. It's even a little scribbly, but I knew that with the method I was using, some of these like little scribblies, I gave it a kind of roughness, looseness, and it would be covered up by the marker and toning, the blacks and the gray tones. So as long as the basic drawing and structure was there, it would still deliver. So we went from that, as I said earlier, I Xeroxed that onto more bond paper and ended up with a Xerox, which is what this is, which I then added live black marker to. I'll lift it up. So you can see it's inked with black ink. And I just chunky markers, probably something. What do we got here? Something like these ones, you know, these good old Faber-Castell. Which way does it go? You know, or maybe, I don't know if I was using the big brush ones. I really like these. They're great. Very zoomed in life here. Pitt artist pens, things like that. So I went crazy with that, but the idea was to establish lighting and graphic patterning that was pleasing. So I was very careful of thinking of the big shapes, like, and in a situation like this, I was like, see this big chunky shape here? Do I make this side dark with this light or the reverse? So there are always decisions because you can't make both dark, right? It's going to look ridiculous and it won't look like lighting, it'll just be black. So once you pick one side, you're implying that the light's coming up from this way somewhere. So that's why I ended up with also putting the black here. And it's about thinking about graphic shapes that will be realistic elements in the room, but gave me an opportunity to create these big graphic chunky shapes. Because if you look at it almost like a design, like sideways or upside down, it's a bunch of black shapes. You're trying to move the eye around, you're trying to make a pleasing composition of that. So let's go back to the last stage. So then I took a Xerox of this, like I said, and ended up with a rendering, final rendering, where I built on what I had established in terms of the lighting earlier. So here, to compare, we've got a feeling of light. Like here I made it like there's a feeling of light coming from the screen. So I kind of sneakily switched the lighting, see how the light's coming against this plane. But here it's coming this way against this seat. And then in the rendering, I worked with that, see, to make a cast shadow and made it like this foreground is kind of darker. But you're always working light against dark to create some interest, because if everything gets too black, I mean, you could do that, but that would be a very somber mood. So here I, thinking of a functioning, very chunky concrete type room, future tech type thing. I put lighting under here and had it illuminate this door fading down into more darkness. Highlight being consistent on the top surfaces. These would be lit, these buttons. So if you think of like, there's different zones of lighting, like this has got its own little zone. Then this plane is dark. There's again light here. And this little enclave around his security monitors is got a bunch of light being cast. So I'd be interested to actually see some of these, how they translated into the final. Because a lot of times I didn't see the shows. I was busy working on the next ones. they wouldn't be aired for a while, so I wouldn't see the stages, and then later, you know, you lose track. But I could look them up, and maybe I'll do that. So one other comment I'd make is that when I look at the design of these, you can see it's fairly simple. Again, like I wouldn't, on a longer shot, super fuss about the micro details like little buttons and things. I was really trying to establish a cool looking pattern and hopefully readability, and a few functional elements like one of those caged in, maybe that's like an emergency light that would come on. This could be like a fire extinguisher with a handle that I was alluding to, so people would recognize that like handle. You know, a few functional elements like that can go a long way to creating a sense of functionality and believability. It's almost like they tell a story themselves. Whereas if you make it too high-tech, everything being gizmos, and there's nothing that anyone can identify, it goes into that land of complete craziness. And what I always liked in design, you know, growing up seeing stuff in movies like Alien, with great stuff designed by Ron Cobb or Sid Mead, is a mixture of very cool looking stuff, but also a sense of functionality. And yeah, so that's some of the philosophy, that's some of the process of creating these designs. I've got more that I'm going to show at some point, because I know, like I said at the beginning of this video, I know a lot of people are still interested in Batman Beyond. There's even talk of maybe turning it into a live action movie, which I hope happens. They could make a very good one if it's done in the right, by the right hands, in a right way. Like you could even do something in this type of vein of the Spider-Verse type approach. You could do a much stricter 2D type of thing. There could be a lot of different treatments that could work really well, depending on who does it and how they do it. Anyway, that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed that, and please comment, like, share, subscribe. Anything else you can think of. I usually try to respond within a decent length of time to the different comments that I get, which I appreciate. And again, I appreciate anybody watching. So thank you, and see you in the next video.